Hey everyone, welcome back to Purology. I'm Puri and this is Faceoff episode 16. Today I'm doing a mid-range GPU comparison for Escape from Tarkov. I think typically we tend to think of the mid-range starting at the 7 series of cards, like the 3070, 6700 XT for example. And this nomenclature is kind of universal as 7 usually represents the beginning of the mid-range for CPUs as well. For example, Ryzen 7 and Core i7 from Intel. I tend to think of this range as offering the best value and bang for the buck while still offering a really great experience. Before the GPU market exploded, I think right around $300 was the average people could expect to spend to get in the beginning of the mid-range of cards. Now that the spike has passed, we're left with a surplus and a dying demand for parts. So, although I think hardware pricing will continue to trend back up after this, I think we're in a place right now where a mid-range $300 card is a reality. So, in my opinion, a mid-range card right now should allow you to kick up the graphics settings a decent amount while maintaining great frame rates in 1080 and good frame rates in 1440 native, and even very good frame rates in 1440 with upscaling. The RTX 3070 and 6700 XT models can regularly be found under $300 these days if you look hard enough. Although I think we're moving towards 1440 becoming the norm, right now I think the larger majority of gamers are on 1080, and these recent Steam results reflect that reality. Although there are newer generation cards out like the 4070, these are still firmly in the mid-range in my opinion, and the 4070 sits even up higher in that mid-range, now closer to the high-end range of cards. With the 4060 Ti coming in at $400 new, it has a lot to prove. So join me in this comparison to see how it stacks up against the 3070 and 6700 XT and find out if it's worth the extra $100 or more if you're an EFT player. Alright, looking at factory 1080 low FPS, 3070 coming in last place with 151 average and a 94 FPS 1% low, 6700 XT at 170 and 115, and then the 4060 Ti right behind it at 166 and 110. Moving on to the CPU stats, pretty much the same across the board. In the high 70s for power usage, around 25 to 30 for CPU usage, and then right around 57 for temps. Okay, so looking at GPU stats, this is where things get interesting. 3070 and 6700 XT both using 127 watts of power. 3070 at 39 degrees, the 6700 XT at 45. If you look at the 4060 Ti though, it's using a drastically lower amount of power. The performance was almost equal to the 6700 XT, and the CPU usage was about equal across the board. But if you look at the power usage numbers, it's using almost 50 watts less than the other two GPUs, so that's pretty crazy to think about. And there are a few implications that come with that I think should be considered when comparing these cards. And also when comparing new generation versus older generation cards in general. When I kicked up the textures to Ultra, on factory, the 3070 actually took the lead at 146 with the 103 1% low. And then the 4060 Ti came in last at 119 and 84. On the CPU side of things, the 4060 Ti was using about 8 watts less than the other two cards. The other two were at about 75 watts. So even though the FPS performance was about equal between the 3070 and the 6700 XT, the 3070 is using 243 watts while the 6700 XT was at 200, and the 4060 Ti sipping at 142 comparatively. On streets, 1080 low, I saw the same thing happen, the 3070 lagging behind the other two, while the 6700 XT and 4060 Ti were pretty equal in performance. On the CPU side of things, pretty much equal across the board, not much to report here. And again, the 4060 Ti only using 90 watts, while the 3070 is using 153 and the 6700 XT is at 137. So huge difference there, and probably the most significant statistic so far. And looking at 1080 Ultra, I'm seeing the same pattern that I saw in factory. When the textures are kicked up, the 3070 takes the lead, and the 4060 Ti and the 6700 XT taking a backseat. Exact same pattern here for the CPU. A little bit lower power usage with the 4060 Ti, and 3070 and 6700 XT just about equal. And looking at the GPU stats, the 3070 had a slight performance lead, but it's using a lot more power than the other two at 243 watts. The 6700 XT using 205, and the 4060 Ti again sipping at 142. All of them were at pretty much max GPU usage. Alright, moving on to 1440 on factory using low settings, the 3070 in the lead with a 149 average and 93 1% low. 6700 XT and 4060 Ti about equal at 138 and 135. Excuse me. At 138 and 135. However, the 6700 XT did have a 10 FPS average on the 1% low over the 4060 Ti at 93 over 83. Looking at CPU stats, it's been the same story pretty much every time we've looked at them. Nothing to report here. And this is where I'm really interested in the numbers. 3070 again had a slight FPS advantage, but it's using 188 watts versus 146 and 101 from the 6700 XT and the 4060 Ti respectively. Going to 1440 Ultra, numbers dropping a lot here, but the 3070 taking the lead at 91 and a 68 FPS 1% low. The 6700 XT had 81 and 58, and the 4060 Ti really struggling in 1440 Ultra with a 63 and 47 split. Okay, looking at CPU numbers, again 4060 Ti using a little less power than the others, but numbers pretty equal across the board. And the same trend is following here with the 3070 using the most power at 254, 6700 XT and 4060 Ti at 213 and 137 respectively. So looking at the relationship between the low and ultra numbers in 1440, it's obvious that the textures are the limiting factor here. So what I did was use my pyur presets and enable DLSS for the RTX cards and FSR 2.2 for the 6700 XT. And here are the new numbers. With my optimized presets, I'm getting pretty much 1440 low numbers with maybe 90% of 1440 Ultra visuals. So I'd say that's a pretty good trade-off. So in Streets 1440 low, where the 4060 Ti was lagging behind the other two on low resolution, this time it's leading at 152 and 92. 6700 XT had the lowest 1% at 79. CPU usage, power, and temp pretty much equal across the board. And then the same trend we've been seeing where the 3070 is using the most power, 6700 XT a little behind it, and then the 4060 Ti in its own class way behind the other two. On Ultra, it looks like we're getting close to being CPU bottlenecked, maybe. Stats are almost even across the board. Nothing really notable happening here on CPU. And the only thing to note on the GPU side is the same trend is being followed as we've seen with every other test so far. So with my optimized pyur presets, it looks like I got it close to the CPU bottleneck. Stats are pretty even across the board, little variation on the 6700 XT there. And as we've been seeing with the 4060 Ti, the CPU is just using a little bit less power. Lastly, not much to note except that the 3070 is using the most power, 6700 XT a little behind that, and 4060 Ti way behind both of them. Okay, so I showed you a bunch of numbers and graphs, but what does it all mean? To me, all three of these cards are in the same range in terms of performance. They're very good 1080 cards, and with upscaling can be great cards in 1440 as well. The advantage of the 3070 and the 6700 XT is that there are a ton of used options available, and if you know what to look for, then it's a very cost-effective way to get a good card right now. That represents a great savings over the 4060 Ti, which comes in at $400. For those who prefer to buy new, the 4060 Ti is a great 1080 card and a great 1440 card if you know how to optimize the settings properly. You can get pretty amazing performance for this price range of GPUs, in my opinion, with very little visual compromise. So that's going to do it for me in this episode. I hope the information I presented was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comments section below. My Discord link is in the video description, and I'm always up for a good conversation about tech, hardware, cars, shoes, sports. Feel free to shoot me a message or visit my website and submit a video request, a technical support, or build help request. As always, thanks for spending some of your time here, and as I said earlier, I hope the information I presented was helpful. I hope you have a great rest of your day.